Hi guys, welcome to the TOEFL speaking test. Stay tuned till the end of this video because we have some sample answers that will help you improve your answers. In the next videos, we will talk about these answers in more detail and talk about what makes them good, but also what mistakes the speakers made and what you can learn from those mistakes. Now, get ready to take the TOEFL speaking mock test.
In this question, you will be asked to give your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to prepare your response and 45 seconds to speak. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Private cars should not be allowed in the city centers of large cities. Use details and examples to explain your opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep.
In this question, you will read a short passage about a campus situation and then listen to a talk on the same topic. You will then answer a question using information from both the reading passage and the talk. After the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Read an article in the campus newspaper. You will have 45 seconds to read the article. Begin reading now. Now listen to two students discussing the article.
Hey, did you read about this plan?
Yeah, and I think it's a really great idea.
Why's that?
Well, a lot of new students really need this. I mean, it's not just about getting extra help with the course material. They'll probably also get information about things like taking notes or the best way to study for exams.
Yeah, I barely even knew how to do those things when I first came here.
Neither did I. So these are things most students wind up having to learn on their own at first. That's why so many of them have a hard time.
And it's probably good that they can work with somebody who has the same interests.
Right. That would be a real advantage, to get information about the classes you're going to need to take from somebody who's already taken those classes. And they could recommend professors and tell you who the best advisors in the department are. Things like that.
I see what you mean. So new students could get access to information about the program from another student's point of view.
Exactly.
The woman expresses her opinion about the university's plan. Briefly summarize the plan, then state her opinion about the plan, and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep.
In this question, you will read a short passage on an academic subject and then listen to a talk on the same topic. You will then answer a question using information from both the reading passage and the talk. After the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Read a passage about the familiarity principle from a psychology textbook. You will have 50 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class.
Some researchers did an experiment related to this. What they did was they assembled a group of subjects, a group of students, and they showed these students a series of geometrical shapes. These were very distinctive shapes, a little unusual, not the kind of shapes the students often see. But they only showed the students the shapes for a very short period of time, about a second. They also lowered the light in the room to make it even more difficult for the students to see the shapes. So the shapes were there for a split second in dim light, and then they were gone. In the next step of the experiment, the researchers again showed the students some shapes, but this time they gave the students a longer time to look at them. And this time they showed the images in pairs, 2 at a time. In each pair, one shape was a shape the students had already seen, for just a split second, in dim light, and the other was some other shape that hadn't been shown to them before. After presenting each pair, the researchers asked the students to say which of the 2 shapes they liked better. Most of the time, the students preferred the shape they'd already seen earlier in the experiment. Now, if you asked them if they'd already seen that shape, they probably wouldn't know for sure. But that didn't matter. They still tended to prefer the shapes they'd already seen.
Explain how the experiment described by the professor illustrates the familiarity principle.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep.
In this question, you will listen to a short lecture. You will then be asked to summarize important information from the lecture. After you hear the question, you will have 20 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
So, okay, we've been talking about frogs, and like all amphibians, frogs have thin skin, which means that they lose moisture through their skin easily. Now, typically, we think of frogs as living in wet environments, but for frogs who live in dry places with desert-like conditions, this can be a problem. Frogs have been able to survive in such areas by having different physical features, special dry climate features that help them maintain an adequate level of moisture in their cells and avoid drying out. Some frogs do this by preventing water loss through their skin. By creating a sort of covering over their skin, they greatly reduce their skin's exposure to the dry air. The covering acts like a barrier that locks in moisture. For example, some frogs secrete a substance through their skin, a fatty substance that they rub all over their skin using their hands and feet, which creates a waxy layer all around their bodies that's almost completely watertight. Other frogs maintain an adequate level of moisture through a different physical feature, one that allows them to store water inside their bodies for later use. A specially modified internal organ inside their bodies enables them to have a high water storage capacity. So the frogs are able to absorb and store moisture during wet, rainy times, which they can rely on to get through dry periods. The aptly named water-holding frog, for example, has a bladder that is highly elastic and stretchable. When it does rain, the frog absorbs water through its skin, and its bladder stretches to hold this extra water. The water is then slowly released from the special bladder into the frog's internal tissues until the next rain, which might not be for several months.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain 2 dry climate features of frogs.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep.
I agree that private car should not be allowed in the city centers of large cities. I think this way for 2 reasons. Firstly, congestion has been a big problem in a lot of large cities. For example, in the city I live in, during peak hours, which normally a 15-minute trip can turn into a 45-minute trip. Imagine the time and energy wasted by the driver. A lot of time, especially during peak hours. Traveling to the city by public transport takes less time than driving. Secondly, with more cars sitting in idle, more greenhouse gases are emitted. That's not good for the environment.
I personally do not agree with the statement. I am aware of how useful cars are, but having private cars could be more of a disadvantage instead of an advantage for me. And I actually have two reasons for it. Well, first of all, we know how cars can be a big cause of air pollution that could be a very harmful effect to the environment. And having a lot of cars in large cities would just probably worsen the pollution. Secondly, the traffic jam is going to be bad. In my country, which is the Philippines, it has one of the worst traffics in the world. And I think if private cars were to be allowed, it is not going to be a good idea.
According to the article, the university has announced that there will be free tutoring for all students in their first year. As the university is aware of the academic problems a lot of first-year students face, the program is designed to assist first-year students who needs additional support with academic work and matching them with a tutor who major in their chosen field. The woman thinks the program is a good idea. She thinks it's not just the academic support new students are getting. They are also getting tips on taking notes, ways to study for exams, and it's an advantage to get opinions from someone with the same interests. And opinions on classes that the new students is going to take from someone who's already taken them can recommend the professors and best advice.
In the letter, it says that a tutoring program will be available for students for free. The main reason is because of how freshmen seem to have a really hard time when catching up to their homeworks or other school stuff. The woman agrees with the idea written on the letter, and she has two reasons for it. To begin with, she first stated that the new students, or the freshmen, need these programs for them to get help from their chosen course and also be able to get information on how to take notes or how to effectively study, specifically for the examinations, since new students have a hard time learning on their own. She also stated that this could be actually a big advantage, mainly because freshmen can have information from students with previous experiences from the classes they're currently taking, who can recommend the best professors or the best advisors in the department.
The familiarity principle states that people are more inclined to choose subjects that they are familiar with or have previously exposed to. In the professor's experiment, students were gathered to look at different shapes in the room for a split second, sometimes in dim light. And when shapes were shown to them a second time, which is for a longer period, students tend to choose the shapes they've seen before in the dim light. That explains and proves the familiarity principle.
According to the reading passage, people have the tendency to prefer things they have previously encountered instead of something new. This principle is called the familiarity principle, and it operates even when people are not conscious from the item they have previously experienced. Actually, a professor in psychology class shared an example about this principle. He stated that some researchers has done a study about it. Their subjects consist of students, and they showed them two different kinds of geometrical shapes. For the first one, they showed it in a dim light in a very short amount of time, just like a split second, making it difficult for students to see the shapes being shown to them. However, for the second one, they showed the shapes in pairs with a clear light and a longer time. One shape was something they've seen, and one shape being unfamiliar to them. Almost all of the students actually chose the familiar shape.
There are two dry features of frogs that help them survive in dry conditions, such as in a desert. As frogs usually have thin skins, which means they lose moisture easily. The first feature is that they excrete a cover on their skin. It could be a waxy substance in which the frog rubs all over its skins with its hands. And this acts as a barrier to protect their skin from drying up. The second feature is that they have stretchable bladder, which they can store extra fluid in the body and this could last up to a few months when the area they are in doesn't rain.
In a biology class, the professor gives a lecture about frogs and how it has thin skins just like any amphibians. Well, for frogs who live in dry areas, the professor explains two different special dry climate feature of these animals. Well, to begin with, the first one the professor has said is how the frogs can maintain an adequate amount of moisture to their cells in order to avoid drying out. And they also prevent water loss to their skin. This covering could act like a barrier. An example would also be a fatty substance that frogs use in order to create a waxy layer around their bodies. The second one is how frogs can modify their internal organs to put higher water storage inside their body. They also absorb water when it rains and stores it into their bladder. These are the key features that can help them survive the dry period.